Since the beginning of the modern era, there has been a debate over the first 11 chapters of Genesis. Are these writings history or myth? Now, all would hold the same view that the first 11 chapters of Genesis are intended to teach spiritual truth and wisdom. I mean, right now I'm currently reading Jordan Peterson's We Who Wrestle with God, and he has a very unusual view of God that is very far, in my opinion, from the view of God presented in the Bible. But man, he gleans a lot of wisdom and truth out of the narratives of the first chapters of Genesis on how to live with wisdom and productivity. So all of us take this wonderful spiritual instruction from the first 11 chapters of Genesis. But should we also view Genesis as an accurate historical account of God speaking creation into existence through his word, forming Adam out of the dust of the ground, followed by a worldwide flood, and then the building of a big tower before our languages were all jumbled up by God himself? Is what we have at the beginning of Genesis, is that history or is it myth? J.R. Miller, or Joe as he goes by, comes to us with a short, compact book intended to demonstrate why Genesis stands apart from the myths of the other ancient Near Eastern peoples. Unlike the myths of the Egyptians or the Akkadians or the Mesopotamians, the Bible stands apart as a book that was written to be taken as genuine history and not mythological stories. And if you have a few minutes, I would like to tell you why Genesis stands apart and what you can expect from Joe's new book. Welcome to Rev Reads. If you want to discover more books that will help you to approach the Bible from a place of skill and knowledge, please subscribe to the channel in order to stay up to date with my latest book reviews. Also, share this video with as many people as possible to help them know about the work of J.R. Miller. Now, I'm kind of wrestling with my feelings over the length of this book. This is a short one, about 50 pages in the main body of the book, and part of me loves that, because many books are too long. I still think the worst part about Gary Habermas's magnum opus on the resurrection is that you could probably cut at least 100 pages from each of those books and not lose anything of substance. So it's kind of refreshing to see a book that's boiled down to this core of 50 pages. And in the end, I'm going to vote in the positive for the length. And I think there's a lot of people in the church who would be interested in knowing how Genesis stands apart from the other ancient myth stories of that time period, but they're not going to wade through a lengthy treatment on the subject. And so this book provides the most important points on the issue in only a short package. And also, I think Miller does prove his point on the unique character of Genesis in only 50 pages. So why keep beating that dead horse and going over the same ground if you've already won the argument? Now, this book is divided up into 6 chapters. The first 2 are an overview on simply how Genesis is different, why it is better to take Genesis as Theo-History. And that is theology that comes from a historical account instead of stories that were crafted to teach history. He presents what he calls the divergenist view of Genesis, and that is the view that Genesis stands distinct from all of the writings of that time period. Genesis is not myth. It is storytelling that reveals the material origins of this world. And then in chapters 3 through 5, he explains 3 primary ways that Genesis stands apart. First, in Genesis, the world is made out of nothing. It is made by the word of God. We call this creation ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, instead of creation ex materia, that is creation from material. This makes God himself set apart from creation and makes creation distinct from the nations around Israel. Second, creation is contingency and not theogony. So forgive me if I pronounce a few words wrong in this review, but through a study of the Hebrew word bara, which is a word for create, Miller demonstrates that creation is dependent on the work of God. God is not dependent upon a material world to make things out of, or anyone or anything else. The God of the Bible did not need materials laid out for him that he would fashion, but God could create a world that would be entirely dependent upon him. God is superior. God is distinct from the other deities of the ancient Near East in the simple use of the Hebrew word bara for create. It's a word that could not be used in any of the other mythological creation tellings of that time period. Finally, the Bible stands apart from the way that God made the world through a divine command and not a battle to establish a hierarchy of power. There is no battleground in the creation of Genesis 1. Reading the narrative creation in Genesis 1 in comparison to the narratives of all the neighbors around Israel, in my view, and Miller shares that view in this book, I think one of the things that stands out the most about the Genesis 1 narrative is the peace that is seen in the creation narrative. You just have this simple, beautiful story of crafting and filling and going from goodness to very good, which is so different from the warfare among the various gods and the forces of the primordial deep that is found in the other writings of this time period. So to summarize it, what Joe shows us is that the creation account in Genesis is just different. And in this short, compact book, he demonstrates why it is different. It is not simply that the Israelites were monotheists and they believed in one creator God in comparison to the polytheism of their neighbors. Really, that's just the tip of the iceberg in the ways that Genesis stands alone. So if you want to know why Genesis is presented to us as history, and the authors of the Bible intend for us to take it as history, I would encourage you to pick up Set Apart: How Genesis Stands Alone by J.R. Miller.